Thanks to the conference organizers. I appreciate this opportunity to talk about this study that Sarah and I have both been involved in, actually. And we're really trying to look at the veterinarian's role in pharmaceutical disposal because it's been understudied previously. So some quick background slides here. Really, pharmaceutical use in the US, we use a lot of medication, right? There's 4 billion prescriptions filled every year, and a third of those go unused. That's on the human side. It's pretty similar on the veterinary side as well. And so this is a risk on both sides of the health professions, and we need to try and better look at this. We all, hopefully many of you know what pharmaceuticals are found in the environment, and it basically spans all the different classes we think about, from hormones to beta blockers to tranquilizers, kind of everything in between. And this has been known for 2 decades now. We've managed to detect these levels in a lot of different surface water areas, and even in some groundwater situations as well. And most of these concentrations are small, right? They're microgram per liter amounts, parts per trillion or parts per billion in some cases, but they still potentially can have effects. And so aquatic wildlife, we know, can have reproductive and developmental impairments. Terrestrial wildlife, great example, obviously vultures in India, for those of you who know about diclofenac there, as unintended species that were affected by cattle getting that non-steroidal anti-inflammatory treatment. These vultures fed on those cattle after they passed, and 95% of the vultures were eliminated over a period of 10 years because of how it affected their kidneys. Agricultural crops, we know that some plants can certainly uptake pharmaceuticals at certain levels. And livestock, we have one of the risks is potential to promote antibiotic resistance. And so a couple quick examples, juvenile Chinook salmon in the Puget Sound in Washington. This is a study from 2016. And they tried to look at estuary waters, the wastewater treatment plant effluent, and fish tissues, tested for about 150 different compounds. And they found most of those compounds actually in the wastewater treatment plant effluent and in the fish tissues. Things like sertraline, triclosan, estrone, and fluoxetine were all found in these fish tissues. And so, while they may not have a huge biologic or physiologic effect necessarily in these fish, in the specific example, there's certainly risk there of accumulation. In a more laboratory controlled situation, this study from 2009 looked at African clawed frogs and had tadpoles growing in clean water and those in 38 parts per billion of fluoxetine. So a pretty small amount. But this antidepressant at 57 days had pretty big effects on slowing metamorphosis. So you can see that tadpole on the left having developed legs and the one on the right having not at this point when it should have. Go back. So, on the human side, we obviously concerned about our species, right? I'm a veterinarian, but I still care about public health and people. And so we're concerned about accidental poisonings for sure, drug abuse, drug misuse, and pet poisonings. And so there's nearly 15,000 people that die every year from overdoses involving prescription painkillers. And there's enough prescription painkillers prescribed in 2010 to medicate every American adult around the clock for a month, which is startling, and that was a decade ago. And nearly 70% of pediatric poisoning ER visits are due to medication overdoses. So just having these around and not knowing how to dispose of them is a big risk. And from the pet poisoning side, here in Urbana, we actually have one of the 2 major national pet poison control hotlines located right here through ASPCA. And so a large number of their calls have to do with not only pet medications that are gotten into by pets, but also human medications, since a lot of them overlap. And there are real challenges and barriers to pharmaceutical disposal, and how do we approach this, and how is it messaged out? Getting back to risk communication and how do we communicate this to the public? There's multiple agencies with oversight. We have, DEA and FDA. On the animal side, we have USDA also playing a role, and several other agencies in there too. We have to deal with knowledge and technology gaps too, and funding to get this out. On the human side, we have some funding. It's still limited, but on the animal side, it's even more limited. So how do we try and prioritize resources so that everyone's informed properly of how to dispose of things from the get-go? And so the question is, why veterinarians, right? We're talking about veterinarians' attitudes here. Why do we even care about them in the first place? We know that veterinarians are a pretty trusted health profession. They're usually in the top 3 of health professions that are trusted. And so they have huge influence. And so this table here on the right is from AVMA's 2018 data, and it shows the percentage of households with pets. And so, over a third households have dogs, and then over a quarter of households have cats. And this percentage continues to grow every time this is done every 5 years. And so overall, there are animals in about 70 million households around the country. And most of those dogs and cats especially come in for at least annual visits. And so there's a big chance for interface there with clients, with those owners, and having that knowledge for the veterinarians to know what to say to them and make sure this is part of what they talk to them about in the exam room is pretty critical. And so there's been a couple studies that have looked at how well the clinicians provide this information about pharmaceutical disposal. And it ranges from 53 to 78% of clinicians don't provide this information on a regular basis. The lower number is actually for veterinarians, which is a good thing. Physicians are actually at the 78% level. But it's still, majority don't have the proper information and don't relay it on a regular basis in the exam room. And so we looked at doing a survey here. This is a survey we put together in 2019 and stretched out for quite a while as we tried to recruit different organizations to disseminate it. And we specifically looked at the 8 Great Lakes states here in the upper right corner because it certainly hit close to home for me here at University of Illinois, and for Sarah with her extension work with the Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. And so we managed to partner with state VMAs or licensing boards and reached about 25,000 veterinarians through email announcements of this electronic survey. We unfortunately had less than a 5% response rate. I'm still not crushed by that. It still meant about 1,000 respondents. And really try to look at their behaviors, knowledge, and attitudes. And so we wanted to specifically know what were the drug disposal practices of veterinarians and what do they think their clients do? How important is this topic to them, and how often is it actually discussed from real actual survey data? And determine ideally what the outreach needs are to best target them moving forward so that we can get them the information they need and how to do that. So these are our 5 hypotheses we came up with. None of these should surprise you at all, that veterinarians do not prioritize discussing pharmaceutical disposal. They're not well informed of how best to dispose. Practicing human pharmaceutical disposal might be more frequent or better done than on the veterinary side, and took primary disposals in the garbage rather than other avenues like reverse distribution. And drivers of pharmaceutical disposal practice likely include what's financially feasible and obviously what's legally required. So to give you a sense of the demographics here from our respondents, we had a majority female. Not surprising, the profession now is between 55 and 60% female, and graduating classes of veterinarians are between 80 and 85% female. So this demographic matches up nicely. Practice type, we certainly got a majority that were companion animal, so that blue chunk there, dog and cat practice. 13% were mixed animal, and 6% were food animal exclusive, so livestock. And then practice location-wise, as you might expect, the majority were suburban, but we did have a decent representation from the rural side as well. And then you can see in the upper right here on that graphic, the percentage breakdown of the respondents from which states they were represented. You see Indiana's missing here. We never got good traction with the Veterinary Medical Association at the state level or the practice board to disseminate the survey. So we did find that there's a decent amount of awareness. So I was pleasantly surprised actually to find that clients are allowed to return medications to veterinary practices in 55% of the cases of those respondents. Veterinarians heavily rely on the professional organizations, especially the national organizations like the American Veterinary Medical Association, AVMA, to get information about what they should be doing and what the standard of practice should be. Government's right up there too, and they oftentimes will rely on their own pharmaceutical distributors to give them information as well. As far as their attitudes go, they were most concerned about human pharmaceuticals, improper disposal of human pharmaceuticals causing problems in the environment, followed by animal pharmaceuticals, and pharmaceuticals in the environment actually then threatening plants and animals' health. And overall, they categorize themselves as somewhat too informed about the environmental issues in their state, which is, I don't think, surprising at all. The factors that influence disposal, obviously legally required, which is one of our hypotheses, was number one. But the other 2 big things were really avoiding misuse and abuse on the human side from these pet pet or livestock pharmaceuticals, and avoiding accidental poisoning. What influence their actions to protect the environment? They really, as you might expect, it's a pretty science-driven demographic. And so scientific studies were number one, followed again by professional organizations having a large influence. Interestingly, financial incentives were at the bottom, really, of the list of influencers out of the 11 that they were given options to select. How do they dispose of these drugs? I was pleasantly surprised to find reverse distribution very close with garbage as far as number 2 of how they dispose of these meds. So certainly the message is starting to get there better. And within the veterinary community itself, flushing medications, which used to be a practice 20, 30 years ago, except for controlled drugs these days, is not really practiced. And the percentage of appointments for pharmaceutical disposals discussed, sadly down at 11%, so not very high and not surprising. And one of the 2 big barriers I identify were forgetting to mention this, because there's just a lot of other things to cover in that 10 or 15 or maybe 20-minute exam window, and not enough time, information, or it's not high enough priority to really get attention. So I did want to highlight some of the differences between demographics here. Companion and mixed animal folks generally follow the law. That's the number 1 reason for how they dispose or what guides the disposal practices. Whereas food animal practitioners wanted to avoid the risk of misuse or abuse above legal implications. Legal implications are actually 3rd on their list overall. I found interesting. Appointments where disposal discussed, food animal folks actually spend or more frequently talk about pharmaceuticals in their farm calls or discussions over the phone with their clients, which was encouraging to see. So what would help? And this is really going to help both myself and Sarah in future steps, but how do we help address this issue with clients? How do we get veterinarians to address it? Well, one easy thing is to add an addition, a standard form that would be put on with discharge instructions that clients or owners received when their patients, their dog, cat, horse, cow is finished and seen. An information card that goes specifically with the prescription itself, and brochures in the lobby or on the farm call truck. How to reach veterinarians? Again, professional organizations I think have a route to go, and there is an active partnership already with the American Veterinary Medical Association to try and push some of this as well. And so how do we help clinics? Really, they need more outreach and education. So a lot of them feel underinformed, and that came across in all the comments included with the survey responses. And then potentially pushing for better regulations or clear regulations on what needs to be done from their perspective.
3 minutes, Will.
Thanks. So the next steps for the research team are really to target preferred means of communication for these veterinarians. We need a partner. We have great partnerships set up now with the contacts at these veterinary medical associations, so we can move that forward along with the national professional organization to provide these necessary resources. And some have been developed already through AVMA over the last decade, but I think there could be additional tools to be developed here that would be more easily disseminated and utilized. And increasing the level of attention received on this topic by those in the veterinary profession. Sarah can attest to this as well, but just now on the radar for most veterinarians. I spent 2 years at U.S. Environmental Protection Agency looking at pharmaceuticals and personal care products in the water systems and their human health impacts and animal health impacts. So it's high on my list, but I'm an anomaly for a veterinarian. So I think this is something where we need to work better on communicating this as a priority that should be addressed. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, or you're welcome to email myself or Sarah afterwards. Thanks.